The first basic concept of GDP was invented at the end of the 18th century. The modern concept was developed by the American economist Simon Kuznets in 1934. GDP tells the country's economy size. Definition: gross domestic product is the value of final goods and services produced within the territory of the country. GDP calculates the value of the product produced in the country. Second-hand mobile sold that doesn't add to GDP. Point considered while calculating GDP. 1. Now, what is the final good? Here mobile is the final product. Mobile made with intermediate products: battery, screen, camera. Now mobile becomes the final product. Only the value of the final product mobile would add to GDP. Intermediate product: battery, the screen doesn't add to calculate GDP. They are intermediate good. When combined all intermediate good, it becomes a final combined product, the mobile phone. 3. GDP counts the only production, for example, second-hand mobile sold that doesn't add to GDP. 2. If India produces new mobiles and export to Australia, the value of sold mobile in Australia add to India's GDP, not Australia's GDP. The gross domestic product (GDP) in India was worth $2,875.14 billion in 2019, according to official data from the World Bank and projections from Trading Economics. The GDP value of India represents 2.39% of the world economy. How GDP calculated? GDP is primarily measured based on the expenditure approach. This approach can be calculated using the following formula: GDP equals consumption plus government expenditure plus investment plus net export. All these make GDP universal measurement and way for countries to stack up against one another. Consumption means people like me and you spend money to acquire goods and services, such as groceries and haircuts. Consumer spending is the biggest component of GDP. Consumer spending makes up more than half of the country's GDP. Government spending represents government consumption, expenditure and gross investment. Governments spend money on equipment, infrastructure, education, and investment. Government spending may become more important relative to other components of a country's GDP. India spent 2.8% of its total GDP on education. Military expenditure, percent of GDP, in India was reported at 2.419% in 2018, according to the World Bank collection of development indicators. Investment refers to private domestic investment or capital expenditures. Businesses spend money in order to invest in their business activities. For example, a business may buy machinery. Consumer invest in buying home comes under the investment. Net export. The country's export should be greater than imports to boost the economy. Definition of net export: NX equals exports minus imports. If a country export product about $65 billion and import product about $50 billion, then net export would be $15 billion that will add to GDP. I hope you have subscribed to my channel.